So now we'll look at prophecies related to the actual Exodus. They were in the fourth generation and they were reaching the end of the 400 years, but that doesn't mean the Israelites knew that they were in that time frame. Prophecies generally aren't given so that people can map out a timeline of where they are and so that they can see it in advance. As we've been saying all along, it's warnings and promises. So in chapter 3, God appears to Moses and tells him that he's come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians and to take them to the promised land. It's unclear at this point how much the Israelites knew about their own history. After all, the last they heard from God was in the time of Jacob. Moses may have only been the fourth generation, but Joshua was the 11th generation, which works out to about an average generation length of about 22 years. Joshua was descended from Ephraim, and apparently they tended to have their children a lot younger. So a lot of generations had come and gone since. So much may have been lost after the death of Joseph, and consider also the massive growth in population. So when God appears to Moses says, when I go to the people and tell them God has appeared to me, they'll say, what is his name? What shall I tell them? And God says, I am that I am. Therefore you shall tell them, I am has sent me to you. It's also been translated as, I will be who I will be. So this is the meaning of the name Yahweh. At least Yahweh is how we try to pronounce it. It's built from the Hebrew letters that correspond to YHWH. No one really knows how to pronounce it today because the Jews became superstitious about saying it at all. So it's uncertain what vowels would have been used at that time. So the name Yahweh essentially means he who is, or he who shall be. And when I say he who is, that doesn't mean right now, but 5 minutes from now he might not be. It's a continual he is. So he was, he is, and he shall be. In the book of Revelation, God is sometimes called he who was and is to come. This idea of I will be who I will be is a prophetic name, and God calls it a memorial name. So it has this idea of all three, of past, present, and future. This illustrates a significant difference in how the God of the Bible is portrayed versus mythological gods. Mythological gods usually have origin stories of where the god came from. But Yahweh, the God of the Bible, just is. He is he who is. He is he who was and is to come. He just is. Exodus chapter 3 is the first place God's name is elaborated on at all. It's used in Genesis, but here it's elaborated on. When we get to chapter 6, God says, by my name was I not known to them, referring to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It isn't that they didn't know the pronunciation of the name. They didn't have the understanding of the name that God was giving to Moses here in Exodus chapter 3. Pronunciations and nuances of word meanings may have changed over the time period since Abraham. It's a significant amount of time. We look at how we speak today versus how people spoke 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. Significant changes occur in that amount of time. So while Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob knew the name Yahweh in some form, they didn't have the fuller understanding that God was giving Moses. The later superstitions over speaking the name of God caused the Israelites to replace Yahweh with the Hebrew word Adonai for Lord, which is why when you see Lord in all capitals in most English translations, that's the substitution for Yahweh. Occasionally you'll see Lord God with God in all capitals, and when that happens, it's usually because the word for Lord, Adonai, is actually there right before the word for Yahweh. They didn't want us to write it as Lord, Lord, so they wrote it as Lord God with the God in all caps. We'll talk more about the names and titles of God in a later video. You may also notice that God doesn't give the Israelites a time frame of when he's going to take them out of Egypt. He sends Moses and tells them he's going to take them out of Egypt, but he doesn't say on this day at this time or anything like that. He gives them a promise, and it's up to them to either believe it or not believe it. But he does tell Moses that the king of Egypt will not just let him go just because they say to. He won't let them go unless he's compelled to with a mighty hand, it says. And God says he will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it. After that, he will let you go. And later it says he will drive you out. But there were trials along the way. For a while, things got worse for the Israelites rather than better. And that sometimes happens to us if we become Christians or rededicate ourselves to God. Sometimes the things we do in obedience to God actually seems to make our lives worse. And that's what happened to the Israelites. In slavery, they were forced to make bricks, and straw is a key component of bricks. Up till then, they were provided with the straw, but after Moses appeared before Pharaoh, they were required to go get the straw for themselves. So it got even worse for them. Very upset, Moses says to God, "O Lord, why have you done evil to this people? Why did you ever send me? Since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has done evil to this people, and you have not delivered your people at all." And that's where God gives Moses the prophecy that you'll see what I do to Pharaoh, and after that, he will drive you out. So that's the prophecies we get in the early chapters of Exodus. God says, I'm going to set you free from Pharaoh and Egypt, but they don't get free. Things get worse. So the question then becomes, do you believe God that he's going to do what he said, or do you not? And you and I are faced with that question often today. In the next video, we'll get to the plagues.